Hey guys, Kevin Yates here, and I got another question from a reader of my blog that I wanted to address. So I'm going to go through this question real quickly, and then I'll go through some of the tips that, or some of the advice that I'll suggest. So anyways, get to the question. This is from Matt. So Matt, you're talking about as long as you can remember, you've had tight quads and hamstrings. You failed all the flexibility tests. You have pain mostly in your lower back. You used to run. You stopped a decade ago because your shins and knees hurt too much. Basically, you resolved the shin and knee pain. That's good. But you only run about 4 miles. And what you notice is that you're running for a while and your back starts getting tighter and tighter. And then one day you'll do something and twang, there goes your back. Yeah, that's typical for a lot of people, unfortunately. It's not always running either. You went backpacking and same thing, 10 miles from a trailhead, you pulled your back. The first time this has happened was 15 years ago, and it's been happening more often. Your kinesiologist said that your hips tilt forward, everything's tight, and you've been doing stretches for 15 years nearly every day. As much as you stretch, you should be able to get a job at Cirque du Soleil. There you go. And so I read your website and I figured I'm doing something wrong. I also ride my bike in the summer, and one thing I learned is stretching alone doesn't help. I need to exercise as well. Your body doesn't seem to be ready for running though. Okay, thanks Matt for your question. Actually Matt, I jotted down a few things because as I was reading this, a lot of possibilities were coming to mind, and I just wanted to make sure I didn't leave anything out on this. So again, for the sake of the length of the video, and also because I'm not able to see you in person and do any kind of a formal assessment, so I'm doing my best to give you some tips and advice to move you out of where you are now, move you forward, and hopefully get you back to some more healthier and pain-free running to the best that I can. So first thing, Matt, a couple things that are kind of unclear to me is when you say you failed all the flexibility tests, I'm not sure which tests that you performed, what you failed on, what that looked like. Also, your running. When you say you run 4 miles, I'm not sure if you mean you're running 4 miles a day, every day, if that's 4 miles a week, or where your running schedule's at right now. So again, I'll do the best I can. So a couple things, Matt. Your anterior pelvic tilt, let me talk about your quad and hamstring tightness first, okay? A while back I did a video on hamstring stretches for lower back pain, whether you should or shouldn't do them. And basically what I was talking about in the video is that if you have an issue of a tight psoas or tight quadriceps, or maybe it's a little bit of both, what happens is like your kinesiologist said, you get an anterior pelvic tilt. So if this is your pelvis and this is the front and this is the back, so your psoas and quadriceps are more attached and running down toward the front, and behind here, this is where your glutes and hamstrings are. So your pelvis tilts kind of this way, right? So what happens is that you've got the tightness in the front, either in the psoas or the quad, or maybe a little both. But the hamstrings aren't necessarily tight. What's happening is that here's the normal length. So your hamstrings are at kind of normal tension here. But when you tilt the pelvis forward, when you tip it that way, then the hamstrings start to undergo a stretch. So when you try to swing your leg forward, it feels like you have tight hamstrings because of the position of your pelvis. So that's one thing that could be happening. Now, this is assuming that your problem is based on a tight psoas or tight quadricep. The other possibility, and this is something that a lot of times you're in physical rehabilitation, and this could be missed. So because it can appear that you have an anterior tilt and that it's just a psoas thing or a quadricep thing, when it can actually be a quadratus lumborum issue. So you can have a tight quadratus lumborum, which it'll produce a similar visual position of the pelvis, right? But in conjunction, the hip might be pulled up a little bit higher on the affected side compared to the other. So a lot of times though, this is assumed that it's just a tight psoas. So when you say that you've been doing all these stretches and nothing's really helping, well, yeah, one thing is you haven't been doing what it sounds like you haven't been doing either any strengthening exercises or maybe not the right ones, or maybe you've been kind of treating the wrong symptoms, so to speak. So we'll get into that in a bit. The other thing, with the QL, if you have a tight psoas, or a tight muscle isn't always a strong muscle, and I think a lot of times it's easy to assume that if a muscle's tight, it's tight because it's overused and it's already strong. Well, a lot of times it's the opposite that's actually true. Tight muscle can actually be a weak muscle. So, and it doesn't even have to be a tightness thing. Sometimes, it might just be a weakness issue. So in your case, if you have weakness in your psoas, in your hip flexor, then what could have been happening is that you would compensate when you push off the ground. You strike the ground with your foot and you push and drive off the ground. Well, what happens is when your leg goes through extension, and then you have to swing the leg forward to prepare for landing. Well, during that swing phase, if the psoas isn't able to effectively do its job, which is to pull your leg through, then what can happen is you compensate. You develop compensatory strategies, and one of those ways that you compensate is by hiking the hip and kind of pulling the leg around. So that would be a classic way that you can actually have a tight quadratus lumborum. All right, and there's a number of ways to look for it and things you can do. Again, it goes a lot beyond this video. Real quickly, something you can do, you'd have to either have somebody do this with you, or you'd have to have a video camera. So you would, from a standing position, stand with your feet together, all right, and arms at your sides, and then you would just, bend to one side at the waist, and you'd let your hands slide as far down your leg as you can, and then you mark the farthest position that you can. So if you have someone do this who's in front of you kneeling down, they can use one hand to kind of mark where you're at, and then you repeat the test on the other side, and then they mark the other one, and then they can note the difference. So if there's somewhat of a difference, a significant difference on the affected side, you would see that when, like, if it's your right side that's affected, then when you bend to the left, if you had a tight QL, when you bend to the left, you would have less range of motion. You would have gotten not as far down as you did when you bend to the right. So the other way you can do this is you'd set up a video camera, kind of like what I'm doing now, and set it up, make sure that you can get your whole body in there and perform the test, and then watch it back on video. Just a couple ways you can do it. So that's something to get you started and give you an idea if it's there, okay? The other thing that I wanted to talk about is the effects of stress. All right, so what I'm talking about is your running. So if you were doing a high volume of running, a lot of running, what can happen, Matt, is that running it's a very catabolic activity. A lot of distance runners, the marathoners and all that, a lot of them, they do so much running and all this catabolic activity where it's basically just breaking down the body all the time, and there's not enough recovery or anabolic activity to help offset that. So basically it can be an issue of there's just so much more breakdown than there is a building up of the body, right? It's like this constant destruction of the body somewhat. And what can happen is when you've got that much stress going on, then what you've got, Matt, is you've got your psoas muscle, okay, and also you have your kidneys. So the interesting thing here is that there's possibly a correlation between, or I'll say a neurological link between the two, between the kidneys and the psoas, that they share this neurological link. And what can happen if the stress going on is too much, what will happen is that there starts to become a competition between the kidneys and the hip flexors for oxygen, for nutrients, and for to remove waste. So anytime there's a competition going on between the organs of your body and the muscles, the organs are going to win out, because you can do with a hip flexor that doesn't work, but you can't live without kidneys that don't work, right? So basically that's something that happens. Now, when you're undergoing a lot of stress, remember your adrenal glands are affected. They're releasing a lot of stress hormones, and the adrenal glands they sit right on top of the kidneys. So this is what starts to happen. If you start to wipe out your adrenal glands from stress, you get overly fatigued, then that could be what starts to happen too. It could be something that contributes in there. Hopefully that makes sense. Also, the last thing I wanted to talk about, exercises. So let's assume that either if you're not doing enough exercises or you haven't been doing any exercises, whatever the case may be, you know, one of the biggest mistakes that I see in physical rehabilitation is exercises that are prescribed to address an injury. And the exercises are just automatically assumed to be targeting the weak muscles, whatever muscles that are weak. So if you have a tight hip flexor, dominant quadriceps, then you likely have some weakness in your glute maximus and the hamstrings as well within the role of hip extension, and potentially some weakness in the abdominal complex. Now, with the rehabilitation exercises, you know, and this is not to say every single therapist or whoever is doing this, but this is just something that I have noticed a lot of in my experience within physical rehabilitation, is that, you know, I've seen it happen where the exercises are prescribed, and I've seen trainers do it with their clients where it's easy to assume that, okay, let's say you were supposed to be doing squats to strengthen up your glutes and your hamstrings. Well, just because you do a squat, it doesn't necessarily mean you're strengthening those weak muscles. And here's why. If you have a compensation issue going on where, let's say your quadriceps are doing all of this work and they're tight, well, these are muscles, Matt, that they tend to be really short and tight, and they can inhibit the glute max and the hamstrings. So every time you do a squat, the quadriceps are programmed to fire. They're easily excitable. They're activated, like really, really easy, and they'll inhibit the glute and hamstrings from firing. So you could be doing a quote-unquote correct exercise to strengthen your glute and hamstrings, but when you're doing it, if your quads are turning on all the time, there's a compensation strategy going on there that might not be recognized. And so all that'll happen is every time you do a squat, with every single repetition you do, the imbalance, rather than getting corrected, it's going to get reinforced more and more. And that neurological pathway with those quads overworking will act to keep that pelvis tilted forward, keep everything tight, which will put the psoas in a position where it could tighten up, and it really just gets to be a whole mess. You have all kinds of problems that can happen from that. So that's kind of the thing, when you have to know what exercises to do, but then you also have to understand how you're cueing the muscles, the right muscles to be cueing. So this gets into your stretching program, because you know, with stretches, even if you're targeting the right muscles that are tight, that's great. You stretch and you can open up those muscles and create some potential for the other muscles like your glute and hamstrings to become activated, right? When you loosen up those tight muscles, then you've kind of got the room, so to speak, to do it. The problem is that unless you're actually training those muscles and actually getting them to fire, then, or if you're not training them at all, let's say you're not doing any strengthening exercises for it, well, you create all that room, but then once you go back to your regular activity, guess what's happening? You have glute and hamstring muscles that have no idea what to do when you're on your feet and you're moving. So the only thing your body knows is to compensate with the quadriceps. So these are just some things that I was keeping in mind. Again, hopefully this gives you more of an idea of what's going on and will allow you to make some changes to your program. So I definitely would make sure that you, number one, identify, you know, what's going on. Is it a psoas quadricep issue? Is it a quadratus lumborum issue? I really get that figured out. And then the next thing is, in conjunction with your stretching, also include some strengthening exercises. If it's a psoas and quadricep issue, strengthening exercises for the glute maximus, for the proximal hamstring, so your hamstrings in the role of hip extension. So That would mean like not getting on your machine and doing like lying hamstring curls. You know, keep things as functional as you can on your feet in the environment that you already exist in, and train your body that way, because you'll have better carryover. So again, those are a couple things. And then the other thing again is the effects of stress. Looking at your running volume, looking at your exercise volume, looking at things like your nutrition, things like caffeine and stimulants, if those are in there. How much stress is going on either in other areas of your life, because I'm telling you, stress comes in all forms. So you can have stress from exercise, stress from nutrition, stress from needing to meet deadlines at work, stress from having financial issues. I mean, whatever it might be. I'm not saying those are the issues, but take a good look and try and get an idea. You know, stress from not sleeping well. You know, these are all issues that can really be affecting you and creating an issue with adrenal fatigue, and then also compromising the ability of the psoas to function properly. So remember, just because something's tight doesn't necessarily mean it's strong. It might also be weak as well. All right, so hopefully this points you in the right direction, Matt. I thank you so much for your question, and until next time, give me some feedback if this helped you out or not. Anybody else who's watching this video, if this helped you out, or if you have anything else, any other questions that you would like me to answer in a future video, let me know by leaving a comment here, and I'll be happy to do it. Till then, I'll talk to you guys later.